Hello everybody, welcome to the first annual Video Game Outsiders Spooky Video Game Halloween Stories. First up, John, who will be performing Stairs from Creepypasta. Which isn't really a video game thing, but it's John, so here we go.
In the 80s, I grew up in suburban Chicago. In my neighborhood, there lived an old, widowed lady, all alone by herself in a 2-story house. She was completely immobile and bound to her wheelchair. Her husband died a mysterious death, and ever since, she required the aid of a caregiver who would visit her daily to help her with everyday tasks. What made it even more difficult was the fact that the 2 floors of the house were only connected by an old staircase inside. When the old lady needed to move between the 2, the caregiver would have to carry her frail body, like an infant, up and down the stairs. One day, the police received a phone call from the widow. There had been a murder. At the time, police units were scarce, and the murderer apparently had already fled the scene. So only one detective was sent. He went to the crime scene and conducted an investigation. He arrived to see the caregiver's body splayed out on the floor with her vocal cords ripped out and a pool of blood on the first level of the house, with the old lady atop the staircase in her wheelchair watching him, still and silently, seemingly in shock. The officer immediately ruled her out as a suspect due to her inability to move up and down the stairs, and because she was trapped up there at the time the murder took place. It was similar to the death of her husband many years ago, who had suffocated in his sleep on the couch downstairs. The officer put on his gloves, took photos, swabbed for evidence, and covered the body until the coroner arrived later. All routine business. He scoped the house downstairs for any clues, then asked the old lady if he can come upstairs. Could he take a look? She insisted that she was upstairs the whole time, and no one apart from her had been up there that day. But regardless of this, the officer ascended the staircase. Beyond the staircase, there was a narrow corridor with 3 closed doors along it. He checked behind each of the doors. The empty bedroom, nothing. The bathroom, nothing. He became anxious as he slowly made his way to the final bedroom, where the old lady slept. He opened it and everything looked normal. A bed, a wardrobe, and a bedside table with a lamp. He checked every wall of the room in horror, as it was not what he discovered, but it was what he did not discover that made him stop dead in his tracks and slowly reach for his gun in its holster. It was a detail so minor that they had completely overlooked it on the last investigation of the husband's death. There was no phone upstairs. He suddenly heard a noise as he withdrew his gun and rushed out of the room, only to find an empty wheelchair.
And I'll be reading Glory, a short story written by Evelyn Fredrickson that accompanied the Wrathgate cinematic in World of Warcraft, Wrath of the Lich King. The story is told from the perspective of a warrior who fought in the Battle of Angrathar, the Wrathgate. The blacksmith wiped ichor off my sword, eyed the blade, and tossed it into the pile at his feet.
2 damaged. Get another,
he grunted, pointing to the rack of weapons behind him.
Next.
New blade in hand, I rechecked my armor, scared but sound, more than enough for the coming battle. I was looking over my wolf when the order came.
Grokma!
Eagerly, we soldiers formed ranks for our commander, Sarafang the Younger. Behind him stretched the towering shadow of the Wrathgate. He didn't even seem to notice. I'd never met a braver orc. From what I'd seen so far, he was truly his father's son.
Some of you rode here with me from Ezel Nerub, where we pitted our strength against the rotting spider folk. For those who missed it, we smashed our way into their precious kingdom and blocked off their tunnels into the Dragonblight.
He gave us a slow and savage grin.
Arthas won't be getting any reinforcements from them today.
We cheered, and the wind shifted, bringing with it the stench of decay. As if the Forsaken here weren't bad enough, I'd never understand why they'd been allowed to join the Horde. They might hate the Scourge, but they were still undead. Worse, they were traitors. They served the Alliance in life. If the Forsaken could change allegiance once, they could do it again.
And the Alliance has held up its end of the agreement,
Sarafang went on.
Our scouts have just confirmed that Naxxramas II has been cut off.
He raised a gauntleted hand to silence our jeers. A guttural war cry behind him drew his attention. Drawing his axe, he turned at last to watch the battle playing out below us. His vantage point was better than mine, but I heard a loud metallic clanking, and then an unearthly roar. He reacted immediately.
Rise up, sons of the Horde,
He shouted, and turned to face us again.
Blood and glory await us.
Whatever he'd seen, it meant trouble for the reckless humans. We ran to our wolves and mounted up.
Loktar Ogar!
Sarafang cried as he led us down the hill.
For the Horde!
We thundered back in answer. He charged deep into the fray, heading for the humans' general. The rest of us spread out and aided the Alliance forces when necessary. They were fools to have started this fight without us. They'd seen little of war. For the past 6 years, we had been at peace. They were soft, and they were smugly certain they could win the day. It hadn't occurred to them that they might lose. They didn't understand loss, not as we orcs do. I jumped off my wolf and launched myself at a ghoul, severed its head, shrugged off the clutch of its rotting hands. Another undead reached for me, this one a skeleton in rags. And there was another, and another after that. So many. The next one spotted my approach, and her expression changed to fear and anger. One of the Forsaken. I barely managed to halt my blade. Out of my way! I rasped, and thrust her aside impatiently. After that, I let the familiar surge of bloodlust overcome me. My sword became my world. I couldn't see anything beyond it. The elders say we were a peaceful race before we came to Azeroth. Our clans kept mostly to themselves. They hunted game, planted crops, raised families, and lived in harmony with the elements. When I was a child, I wondered what Draenor must have been like. I tried to imagine these strange orcs who had a world of their own, a freedom I've never known. The few times I managed to picture such creatures, I despised them. They hadn't deserved their world, just as humans did not deserve Azeroth. All too soon, the Horde won the day, and the Wrathgate was ours. Yet the biggest task still lay ahead. The brash human general taunted Arthas and drew him out of Icecrown to confront us.
Arthas! The blood of your father, of your people, demands justice! Come forth, coward, and answer for your crimes!
Behind his spiked helm, the Lich King's eyes blazed a chilling blue. He threatened to teach us the true meaning of fear, and as he spoke, new undead clawed their way out of the ground.
You speak of justice, of cowardice. I will show you the justice of the grave, and the true meaning of fear.
But our bold leader had grown weary of fighting Arthas' minions.
Enough talk! Let it be finished!
He ran forward, axe raised. The Lich King's glowing rune blade met Sarafang's axe, and the axe shattered like ice, pieces of metal flying outward. By the time Sarafang's back hit the ground, he was dead, killed in one blow. Impossible. I stared in numb horror while Frostmourne devoured my commander's soul. Again, the human general blustered.
You will pay for all the lives you've stolen, traitor!
Traitor!
Arthas' reply was interrupted by an explosive crash and screams. I looked around. A cloud of yellow-green mist was rising in the middle of the battlefield. Malicious laughter drew my eyes upward. Silhouetted against the bright gray sky, a robed figure stood on the crags to one side of the Wrathgate.
Did you think we had forgotten? Did you think we had forgiven?
Catapults rolled into position on either side of him.
Behold now the terrible vengeance of the Forsaken! Death to the Scourge and death to the living!
They had betrayed us, cursed them and their monstrous queen. Horde and Alliance forces tried to scatter. We were packed tightly together, and the catapults were already firing their payload, barrels that exploded on impact and released more of that noxious-looking mist. Anyone close enough to the blast died instantly. Others doubled over, choking, retching, clawing at their eyes, crying out in vain for aid. After the Third War, we could have defeated the humans once and for all. Instead, Thrall spoke of mercy, as if the humans had ever shown us mercy. I was born in their internment camps. They were pits of filth and despair. We were meant to die there. What would the war chief know of our suffering? The famous gladiator, the human pet? Nothing. He talked us into this, allying with humans time and again, bowing to their demands, starving to death in nearly barren lands, surrounded by plenty. It was the internment camps all over again. Humans were too cowardly to exterminate us up front. They needed to wipe us out all the same. With this deadly mist, it seemed they might finally succeed. My eyes burned and my throat was closing up. Suddenly my legs failed me and I found myself on my knees. There was no heroic end, no glorious destiny. I'd known all along that humans, alive or undead, couldn't be trusted. I didn't deserve this. I could taste my own blood. Then there was only darkness and the sound of my heart as it beat its level. Where are all your words now, War Chief?
Super Mario 128, credited to K.I. Simpson. Mario has been a gaming icon for decades, and has been in more games than can be counted. Although no year in recent memory has gone past without some type of Mario game being released, series fans will remember the nearly decade-long drought of original Mario platformers. See, from 1997 to 2005, there was only one new Mario platformer released, Super Mario Sunshine. During the second part of this drought, after Sunshine's release, the mysterious Super Mario 128 was the main focus of the fanbase. Now, no concrete information was given on the game, and eventually, series creator Shigeru Miyamoto claimed it had simply been a series of test concepts that were never intended to be an actual game. Well, the mystery faded from memory as the Mario drought finally ended, and most people forgot about the game that had once been at the center of every Mario fan's imagination. The Mario drought corresponded with a bad era for Nintendo in terms of console sales. The Nintendo 64 and GameCube did not have the financial success of the earlier Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Nintendo, or the later Wii. And for a very proud company that relied solely on video games to make money, this was quite upsetting for the higher-ranking employees that were attached to the company, and felt its success or failure reflected on them personally. Now, Nintendo started working on a sequel to the 1996 Super Mario 64 shortly after the game was released, but during the late 90s it became clear that Nintendo was not winning the console war. The Super Mario 64 sequel was restarted from scratch, since the company believed that it was not a substantial enough improvement over the original to turn the tides of the market battle. Seeing the generally more realistic and violent games on the Sony's PlayStation, the market leader, Nintendo considered making a Mario that was closer in tone to what the public seemed to want. There was quite a bit of internal conflict over how far to go with this new direction, and the new Mario was clearly not going to be ready until Nintendo's next console, the GameCube. The only hint of this that was released to the public was a comment by Miyamoto that he thought Mario and Luigi should act more like grown-ups in their games for the then soon-to-be-released GameCube. The new Mario project was ultimately split into two games, Luigi's Mansion, which reflected the darker tone that many felt the series should turn to, although it was still toned down quite a bit compared to what some Nintendo executives and developers wanted, and Super Mario Sunshine, which went in the complete opposite direction. Both were released within a year of the GameCube, and Nintendo felt confident that their new system in Mario games would return them to their former glory as market leader. But as those familiar with gaming history know, they didn't. The GameCube did even worse in market share than a Nintendo 64, and the mass market's taste shifted even more towards violent, realistic games. During this period, the somber mood at Nintendo intensified, and the darker Mario project was revived. This time codenamed Super Mario 128. It isn't clear exactly what happened at Nintendo during this period. As we know, nothing called Super Mario 128 was ever released or publicly shown. The source that revealed the internal strife at Nintendo during the later N64 era refused to discuss what was happening during the time of the GameCube's failure, but they released a prototype of the Super Mario 128 online that can be played on the Wii Homebrew channel. The following is a recollection of my time playing it. The game was clearly an early beta. The title screen was nothing but white text saying Super Mario 128 against a black background. There's no option menus or save file selection either. After the title screen, the game just started. Bowser's laugh from Super Mario 64 looped in the background while a plain text box displayed this dialogue. Mario, I have taken Princess Peach and she will not live to see the sunrise tomorrow unless you take her place. You know what to do and where to go. Do not try to stop me unless you want to hasten her death. The game certainly was going for a darker tone. After I made the text box go away, I was thrust right into gameplay. The first thing I noticed was Mario's character model. His body was as detailed as in Super Mario Galaxy, although a little more realistically proportioned, but his head was taken from his SM64 character model. Obviously his design wasn't finished yet. The setting was a sky level. There were some simple platforms floating in the air. The rest of the area was just blue sky with several clouds scrolling in the background. The clouds seemed more realistic than the usual cartoony puffs in Mario games. They were quite graphically impressive. There was no music or full voice samples from Mario, but there were sound effects and grunts while he jumped. The jumping was more subdued than in other Mario games. Mario didn't jump as high as he usually did and had little control over his movement in the air. The different types of jumps in every 3D Mario weren't present. I played through the level. There was nothing especially notable about the gameplay. I just jumped from platform to platform and it wasn't very challenging. As I went through the level, I noticed the graphics gradually changing. The sky became more and more cloudy until it was entirely composed of clouds, and the cloud background gradually turned to a dark gray. After this, it started to rain. I reached a small platform with a toad on it. It looked like the Super Mario Galaxy model. When I landed on his platform, dialogue appeared. We don't want you anymore, Mario. You don't belong here. Just give Bowser what he wants. Die. After the text box went away, I no longer had control of Mario. Mario just stood there for a while, then turned around and walked off the platform. His body seemed to go limp as he fell. Eventually, it was revealed that there was a realistic modern city under the sky. The buildings looked neglected, but there were people on the street. Mario hit the ground with a realistic-sounding thud, but he didn't explode or show any visible wounds. He just lay there. The people in the city just kept walking by, ignoring Mario. Although I thought I saw a few glances at him with cold, somewhat angry expressions. This went on for a few minutes, and eventually people stopped appearing. Mario got up. I was back in control, but he couldn't jump at all and had a reduced walking speed. The large buildings of the city didn't appear to be interactive, so I just kept walking down the street for a while. Eventually, I found a small house that seemed out of place among the larger buildings. When I approached the door, Mario opened it. The screen went white and some black text appeared. The House of Torn Memories. This seemed to be the level title. When I pressed a button, the screen faded back to Mario. He was inside the house from before. Everything seemed bigger than it should. It wasn't gigantic, but scaled as if Mario was a very small child. The house was filled with normal objects covered in dust and signs of neglect. There were no people on the ground floor, just things like broken lamps and rotting food. I found a door that opened to a set of stairs going down, leading to a basement. In the basement, I found a dilapidated couch and a broken TV. However, what really caught my attention was what was on the couch. 2 skeletons that appeared to be children, judging by their size. Due to the scale of the house, they were still larger than Mario. I was starting to get really disturbed by now. How had a Mario game containing this been programmed to this extent? I went up to the skeletons and tried pressing buttons to interact with them or the TV, but nothing seemed to happen. I was about to turn around and look elsewhere when I was nearly scared to death by a deafeningly loud crash coming from the game. What appeared to be Bowser seemed to have broken through the floor from below and landed in front of Mario. I say appeared to be, because this was nothing like the way Bowser is usually rendered. The reptilian monster in the game had Bowser's basic brownish yellow and green color pattern, but looked far more threatening than any Bowser model I'd seen before. It was not proportioned like the Bowser I knew. Its arms and legs were far longer in relation to its body and ended in razor-sharp claws. The green shell didn't look like it had spikes glued on, and they were more jagged and organic looking with the same dark green color the rest of the shell had. And the face, it had small but intense pure black eyes, and a mouthful of jagged teeth that took up far more of the face than it should have. Mario was cowering in fear from this thing. A dialogue box appeared. "You've kept me waiting long enough, Mario. I will taste flesh soon. Will you finally surrender, or does Peach have to die?" I still didn't have control. Mario just stood there, shivering for several seconds before nodding his head. Bowser impaled Mario with his claws. There's no blood, but it was clear from the animation and sound effects that the sharp digits of Bowser's hands had gone through Mario's body. In one swift motion, Bowser dragged Mario up to his face and bit his head off. Again, there was no blood or graphic details left behind on Mario's neck, just Mario's character model being destroyed. The screen faded to black. In white text, another level name appeared. Mario's Eternal Home. Mario's character model was whole again when the level started. It was the only thing on the screen besides the black background. It was floating, as if in space. I could somewhat control it, but it felt more like I was deciding the general direction in which Mario would tumble than fully controlling him. As I drifted towards no apparent destination, voices faded in. They were echoing, deep voices telling Mario that he was worthless, that the world no longer had any use for him, and everyone would be better off if he was dead. High-pitched crying was layered onto the voices after a bit. It sounded like it was supposed to be Mario's cries. This really disturbed me, and I found myself fighting back tears. For reasons I couldn't understand, this was affecting me on an emotional level. The voices and aimless wandering went on for several minutes until I spotted a light gray speck in the distance. I moved towards it. It took a very long time to reach, and grew closer at a much slower rate than it should have. When I was close enough to make it out, I saw that it was a tombstone. It was a very plain one with cracks in several places. When I got right next to the tombstone, I could see writing on it. I turned off the system right after reading it. I'm not going to play the beta or hack whatever that this was again. There was a single word written on the tombstone. Innocence.
Well, that's it this year. We hope you have a wonderful Halloween. Let us know which story you liked the best, which performance moved you. Tweet us at Coast to Michelle, at Blackduck7, at Madam McFly, at VGO Podcast. And we'll see you next year, or Tuesday.